This is my community. You have no right, she shrieked, her voice cracking like cheap concrete under a heavy load. Her face was a blotchy mess of red and white, a mask of pure, undiluted rage. It was the kind of fury I usually saw from people whose cars were dangling from the hook of one of my wreckers, not from the president of the Serenity Gardens Homeowners Association in the middle of a Tuesday night meeting. Too bad for her, I had the receipts. I had the videos. I had a 16-ton heavy wrecker's worth of evidence, and I was about to drop it right on top of her meticulously constructed house of cards. My name is Frank, and this is the story of how I took back my parking spot and dismantled a petty tyrant's little empire in the process. It all started, as these things often do, with a search for peace. My wife, Martha, had passed away a year prior. We'd spent 40 years building a life together, a home, a family, and a business from the ground up. Frank's towing and recovery wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. It was a testament to long nights, greasy hands, and the stubborn refusal to ever give up. After she was gone, the big house felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life I used to live. The silence was the loudest thing in it. So, I sold it. I handed the keys to the business over to my son, letting him run the day-to-day while I stayed on as a consultant, the old bull watching the young one take over the pasture. I bought a smaller place, a tidy little townhome in a community called Serenity Gardens. The name itself was a promise. It was all manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and a thick book of rules designed to keep the chaos of the world at bay. It was exactly the kind of quiet, orderly existence I craved. Or so I thought. My unit was an end unit, and it came with a specific, deeded perk, 2 dedicated parking spots directly in front of my garage. Spots 7A and 7B. They were mine, written into the property deed I signed. One for my Ford F-150, my daily driver. The other was for Martha's car. It was a 1968 Mustang, a beautiful cherry red convertible she'd loved more than anything. I was in the middle of a slow, careful restoration of it. It was my connection to her, a project to keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering into the quiet, empty rooms of my new life. Most days, Spot 7B sat empty, waiting for the day the Mustang would be ready to occupy it. That empty spot, it turned out, was a vacuum. And as I quickly learned, nature, and this HOA, abhorred a vacuum. Her name was Brenda. She was the president of the Serenity Gardens HOA. I first met her about a week after I moved in. She was doing her morning patrol, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a ballistic shield and a look on her face that suggested she'd just smelled something foul. She was a woman in her mid-50s who carried herself with the unearned authority of a drill sergeant in a kindergarten class. Her hair was a helmet of blonde spray, and her eyes were small, constantly scanning for infractions. "You must be the new owner of 7A, she said, without any preamble or welcome. Her voice was sharp, a tool for chipping away at the confidence of others. "Frank," I said, extending a hand. She ignored it, her eyes flicking from me to my truck. "Your pickup is a bit large for the aesthetic of the community, but I suppose it fits within the lines." It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. That was my introduction to the Queen of Serenity Gardens. A few weeks later, the trouble began. I came home from a long day of consulting at the shop to find a massive, white SUV parked in my second spot, 7B. It was parked crooked, its rear tire kissing the white line as if to assert dominance. I figured it was a mistake. A visitor probably got confused. I parked in my spot, 7A, and went inside, expecting it to be gone by morning. It wasn't. It was still there the next day. And the next. For a week, this white behemoth occupied my property. I left a polite note on the windshield. "Hi, you seem to have parked in my private, deeded spot, 7B. Could you please move? Thanks, Frank in 7A. The next morning, the note was gone, but the SUV remained. I was a patient man. 40 years in the towing business teaches you patience. You deal with every kind of human emotion on the side of a highway at 3 a.m. Hysteria, anger, despair. You learn to be a rock. So, I decided to do some light investigation. I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee the next Saturday morning and waited. Around 10 a.m., Brenda emerged from her house 2 doors down. She walked right up to the white SUV, unlocked it, and threw a bag of groceries in the back. So, the Queen had commandeered my land. I walked over, keeping my voice calm and even. Morning, Brenda. She turned, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. Frank. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, gesturing to the SUV. That's my spot you're parked in. 7B, it's on my deed. She actually scoffed. It was a practiced, dismissive sound. The HOA board has designated this spot as temporary guest parking. It's for the good of the community. You weren't using it. I felt a slow, cold gear turn in my gut. It doesn't matter if I'm using it or not. It's my property. I paid for it. It's legally mine. You'll find, she said, her voice dripping with condescension, that the HOA bylaws supersede your personal feelings about the matter. We have a parking shortage. We are utilizing unused resources. It's efficient. She said efficient like it was a magic word that made theft okay. Could you show me that bylaw? I asked, still calm. I read the book cover to cover when I moved in. I don't recall anything about the HOA being able to seize deeded property. Her face tightened. The mask of civility cracked. It's a new addendum. It was voted on last month. You'll receive a copy in the mail. I knew she was lying. Her eyes shifted, a telltale sign of a weak bluff. The kind of look a driver gives you when they swear they put the car in park right before it rolled into a ditch. I'd appreciate it if you'd move your vehicle, Brenda, I said, my patience wearing thin. I will not, she snapped. And I suggest you drop this, for your own good. We don't like troublemakers here in Serenity Gardens. She got in her SUV, slammed the door, and drove off, leaving the spot empty for now, but the threat hanging in the air like exhaust fumes. That was the first declaration of war. I just didn't realize it yet. The promised addendum never arrived, of course. But the fines did. A week later, I got an official-looking envelope from the HOA. Inside was a violation notice. $100 fine for improperly stored vehicle, the vehicle in question. My F-150. The reason? One of my tires was allegedly touching the white line of my own parking spot. I went out and looked. My truck was perfectly centered, with at least 6 inches of clearance on either side. It was a complete fabrication. I contested it, of course. I sent a polite, registered letter with a time-stamped photo of my truck, clearly showing it was parked correctly. The response was another letter a week later, informing me my appeal had been denied by the Architectural Review Committee, which I knew for a fact consisted of Brenda and 2 of her cronies. The fine was now $200 due to late payment. This was how she fought. Not with direct confrontation, but with the slow, grinding bureaucracy of a petty tyrant. She was turning the rules of the community into her own personal arsenal. Her SUV was back in my spot 7B more often than not. It became her de facto second spot. If I had a visitor, they had to park half a block away in the designated guest area. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a tire iron. The harassment escalated. A notice for having a non-approved welcome mat. A fine because the small decorative flag I put out for the 4th of July was, apparently, 2 inches too tall. A warning that my garden hose was not coiled in a community-standard circular pattern. Each fine was a little jab, a reminder of who was in charge. I paid them, for a while. I was still trying to be the good neighbor, the man seeking peace. I told myself it was just the cost of living in a place like this. But it was like trying to patch a slashed tire. The air was hissing out of my peaceful retirement, and the pressure was dropping fast. I started talking to my neighbors. Quietly, at first. My next-door neighbor, Dave, was a retired police detective. He was a good man, quiet and observant, with eyes that had seen it all. Her. Brenda, he said one afternoon while we were both pretending to be interested in gardening. She's a piece of work. Been running this place like her own little kingdom for 5 years. The board is stacked with her friends. Nobody dares to cross her. She's been fining me for breathing, I said. And she's effectively stolen one of my parking spots. Dave nodded, his face grim. Sounds about right. A few years back, old Mr. Henderson in 12C challenged her on a landscaping assessment. Next thing you know, he's getting fined every week for something new. His garbage cans were out 10 minutes too early. A microscopic crack in his driveway. She bled him dry with fines until he finally gave up and moved. The story sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just a power trip. It was a strategy. A war of attrition. She was a bully who used a rulebook as her weapon. I knew then that my peace-seeking approach was a dead end. Appeasement doesn't work with bullies. It only emboldens them. You don't reason with a car that's sliding on black ice, you steer into the skid and get ready to recover. My strategy had to change. The quiet life was over. It was time to fight back. But I wasn't going to fight on her turf. I wasn't going to argue about welcome mats and garden hoses. I was going to fight on mine. The world of rules, regulations, evidence, and leverage. The world I knew best. The turning point, the moment that solidified my resolve from a simple desire to be left alone into a cold, hard mission for justice, came about a month later. I had to go out of town for a few days. My son's wife was having their first child, my first grandchild. I drove upstate to be there, my heart full of a kind of joy I hadn't felt since Martha was alive. Before I left, I had finally finished a major phase of the Mustang's restoration. The engine was rebuilt, the bodywork was done, and it had a fresh coat of cherry red paint. It wasn't street legal yet, the interior and wiring were still a work in progress, but it was beautiful. I carefully pushed it out of my garage and parked it in my own driveway, right behind where my truck would normally be. I wanted to admire it in the sun. It was on my property, well away from any common areas. I was gone for 4 days. When I came back, exhausted but happier than I'd been in a year, I pulled into Serenity Gardens and saw it immediately. My driveway was empty. The Mustang was gone. A cold dread, heavy as a chain fall, dropped into my stomach. I scrambled out of my truck, my heart pounding in my ears. Had it been stolen? I looked around frantically and then I saw it. A small, bright orange sticker plastered to my garage door. It was an impound notice. The notice, signed by Brenda as HOA president, stated that an inoperable, derelict vehicle had been removed from the community in accordance with HOA bylaws. The company that had towed it was Reliable Towing. I'd never heard of them. And I knew every reputable towing company in a 50-mile radius. My blood ran cold, then boiling hot. She had come onto my private property, my driveway, and had my wife's car, my last real piece of her, towed away. This wasn't about a parking spot anymore. This wasn't about petty fines. This was a violation. A deep and personal one. She had crossed a line that she couldn't even see. I called the number for Reliable Towing. The guy who answered was gruff and unhelpful. Yes, they had the car. Yes, there were towing fees. And storage fees. And an administrative fee. It was already adding up to almost $1,000. I drove to the address he gave me. It was a dusty, junk-filled lot on the worst side of town. The office was a dilapidated trailer. My beautiful, newly painted Mustang was sitting in a dirt lot, wedged between a rusted-out van and a pile of old tires. And there was a long, deep scratch down the passenger side door. A fresh one. The rage I felt was pure and clean, like high-octane fuel. It burned away all the grief and exhaustion and replaced it with a singular, diamond-hard purpose. She was going to pay for this. Not just with money. She was going to lose everything she had built her pathetic little kingdom on. I paid the exorbitant fee in cash, got my car, and documented the damage meticulously. I took pictures of the scratch, the filthy condition of the lot, everything. The tow truck driver couldn't even produce a proper invoice, just a greasy, handwritten receipt. The whole operation stank like a blown transmission. When I got home, I didn't park the Mustang in the driveway. I tucked it safely back in the garage, away from her prying eyes. Then, I went to work. The first thing I did was pull out the HOA covenants and bylaws I'd been given when I bought the house. I read them again, this time not as a homeowner, but as an investigator. I highlighted every section pertaining to parking, property, and the board's authority. Just as I suspected, there was absolutely nothing that gave the HOA the right to remove a vehicle from a resident's private driveway. Nothing. The rules only applied to common areas and streets. She had acted completely outside her authority. That was strike one. Next, I did a deep dive on reliable towing. A simple business license search told me the owner's name, Mark Peterson. A quick social media search told me something far more interesting. Mark Peterson's sister was Brenda. He was her brother-in-law. The kickback scheme I had suspected was no longer a suspicion. It was a near certainty. She was using her position to funnel HOA business to her own family, likely at an inflated price, and almost certainly getting a piece of the action herself. That was fraud. Strike two. I felt a grim satisfaction settle over me. This was my world. Untangling messy situations, following the trail, finding the leverage point. It was the same logic I used when planning a complex vehicle recovery from a ravine. You don't just pull. You assess the anchor points, calculate the load, and find the path of least resistance. Brenda's anchor point was her belief that she was untouchable. Her overconfidence was the weakness I would exploit. My neighbor Dave, the retired cop, proved to be an invaluable asset. I laid the whole situation out for him over a beer on his back porch. He listened patiently, his expression growing more and more grim. When I got to the part about her brother-in-law's towing company, he let out a low whistle. "Frank, this is bigger than just a bad HOA president," he said. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud. Conflict of interest. Potentially embezzlement, if she's using HOA funds to pay him." "That's what I'm thinking," I said. "But I need more than just a suspicion. I need cold, hard proof." "So, you get it," he said, a glint in his eye. "You're not dealing with a parking dispute anymore. You're building a criminal case." He gave me some advice. Document everything. Communicate with her only in writing, preferably via certified mail, so I'd have a record of her receiving it. And get cameras. High quality, undeniable video evidence. The next day, I had a professional security system installed. For high-definition cameras with night vision and crystal-clear audio recording. One was aimed squarely at my driveway. Two more covered spots 7A and 7B. The fourth had a wide-angle view of the street in front of our houses. The trap was being set. The cameras were the steel jaws. Now I just needed the bait. My plan, which I privately dubbed Operation Repo, was simple in its concept. I would give Brenda enough rope, and with her arrogance, she would inevitably hang herself with it. I just had to make sure my cameras were rolling when she did. The first phase was to establish an undeniable paper trail. I sent a certified letter to the HOA board. It was polite, professional, and utterly damning. In it, I formally disputed the towing of my vehicle. I cited the specific sections of the bylaws she had violated. I included a copy of my property deed, highlighting the section that granted me exclusive use of my driveway and parking spots 7A and 7B. I attached a bill for the impound fees and a professional estimate for repairing the scratch on the Mustang's door, and I formally requested full reimbursement. I knew she would deny it. That was part of the plan. Her denial, in writing, would be another piece of evidence. It would prove that she was made aware of her illegal actions and chose to double down rather than correct her mistake. While waiting for her response, I moved to the next phase, baiting the trap. I continued to park my truck in 7A. I left 7B, my other deeded spot, conspicuously empty. An invitation. A void waiting to be filled. Then, I started to notice something odd. Different cars, ones I didn't recognize from the neighborhood, would sometimes be parked in 7B for a few hours, or occasionally overnight. A plumber's van. A landscaping truck. A shiny new sedan. My cameras recorded it all. And they recorded something else, too. They recorded Brenda, walking up to the drivers of these vehicles. They recorded what looked like a brief, friendly chat. And on more than one occasion, they recorded the driver handing her something. Something small, green, and folded. Cash. She wasn't just using my spot for herself anymore. She was renting it out. She had turned my private property into her own personal cash machine. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was like finding out the person who stole your wallet was using your ID to get a discount at the movies. The disrespect was as infuriating as the crime itself. The HOA's official response to my letter arrived a week later. As predicted, it was a curt, dismissive letter, signed by Brenda. It stated that the board had reviewed my claim and found it to be without merit. They maintained the car was derelict and that their actions were necessary for maintaining community standards. They refused any reimbursement and, in a final act of spite, informed me that a lien would be placed on my property if I didn't pay the outstanding fines for my welcome mat and garden hose. Perfect. She had taken the bait. She had put her lies in writing. I now had a documented case of her acting outside her authority, a refusal to correct the issue, a clear conflict of interest with the tow company, and now, video evidence of her running a private, cash-only parking scheme using my property. The file I was building was getting thick. It felt good, like the solid, satisfying heft of a quality socket wrench in my hand. It was a tool, and I was getting ready to use it to dismantle her rusty, seized-up little engine of corruption. The time had come to bring this into the light. Not all of it. Just a little piece. Just enough to see how she would react when put under pressure in a public forum. The monthly HOA meeting was the perfect venue. It was usually a dull affair, attended by Brenda, her 2 board cronies, and a handful of residents with complaints about crabgrass. This time, I made sure to invite a few more people. I spoke to Dave, and to a few other neighbors who had quietly complained to me about Brenda's rain. I told them I was going to raise an issue and that it might be an interesting meeting to attend. I walked into the community clubhouse that evening feeling a cold, calm certainty. I had my phone in my pocket, loaded with a very specific video clip. Brenda was at the head of the table, looking smug. The meeting droned on with the usual nonsense. A debate about the approved shade of beige for exterior trim. A lengthy discussion about pets being off-leash. Finally, she got to the end of the agenda. "Is there any new business?" she asked, already starting to gather her papers, assuming there was none. "Actually, yes," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet room. Every head turned to me. Brenda's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Frank. I have a question about the community's revenue streams," I began, keeping my tone light and inquisitive. "I was looking over the budget you all sent out, and I didn't see a line item for it, so I thought I'd ask here. How much income does the HOA generate from its parking rental program?" A confused silence filled the room. Brenda stared at me, her face a blank mask. "I'm sorry, what are you talking about? We don't have a parking rental program." "Oh, that's odd," I said, feigning confusion. "Because I've seen it in operation. For example, the use of deeded Spot 7B as a paid spot for local contractors. I was just wondering how that cash is accounted for in the HOA's books." Her face, which had been pale, began to acquire a pinkish hue. Her 2 cronies on the board looked at each other, confused. "That is a private spot," she snapped, her voice tight. "And there is no such program. You are mistaken. You are making baseless accusations." "Am I?" I asked softly. I pulled out my phone. "I have a video here that might clear up my confusion. It's from last Tuesday. It shows a gentleman in a plumbing van parking in Spot 7B. It then shows you, Brenda, walking up to him, and him handing you cash. Would the board like to see it?" I didn't wait for an answer. I used the screen mirroring feature on my phone to connect to the large TV on the wall that they used for presentations. A second later, the video filled the screen. It was crisp, high definition. The audio was perfect. You could clearly see the plumbing van pull into my spot. You could see Brenda approach. You could hear their conversation. $20 for the day, right?" the plumber asked. "That's the deal," Brenda's voice replied, clear as a bell. "Cash only. Just leave it with me." The video showed the cash changing hands. It showed Brenda pocketing it. The room was utterly silent for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then, a collective gasp went through the half-dozen residents watching. Brenda shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Turn that off. That's illegal. You've been spying on me. That's an invasion of my privacy." "It's a view from my front porch, Brenda," I said calmly. "There's no expectation of privacy in a public parking lot. Especially when you're conducting business on my private property." Her face was contorting with rage. "This is fake. It's doctored. He's trying to frame me because he's angry about his stupid junk car." The denial was predictable. So was the rage. She was cornered, and she was lashing out. Dave, the retired cop, spoke up from the back of the room, his voice carrying the easy authority of his former profession. "Brenda, are you saying, in an official HOA meeting, that this video is a fabrication?" His question hung in the air. She was trapped. Admitting it was real was admitting to the crime. Denying it was just digging the hole deeper. "This meeting is adjourned," she shrieked, banging a gavel so hard it bounced off the table. She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the room, her two cronies scurrying after her like pilot fish. The remaining residents just sat there, stunned, looking back and forth between the now blank TV screen and me. I hadn't won the war. Not even close. But I had just won a major battle. I had exposed her in public, ripped a tiny tear in her veil of authority. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that her retaliation would be swift, vicious, and a massive overreach. I was counting on it. Brenda's response came faster and was more unhinged than even I had anticipated. She had been publicly humiliated, and like a wounded animal, she was lashing out with every weapon she had. The next phase of her attack was a full-blown smear campaign. She used the private community Facebook group as her personal burn book. Posts started appearing, accusing me of being an unstable and aggressive individual. She claimed I was stalking her and that she feared for her safety. She twisted the story of the meeting, claiming I had threatened her with a doctored video in a fit of rage. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Some residents, the ones who didn't attend the meeting, bought it. I saw the way they looked at me now, with suspicion and fear. But she didn't stop there. She escalated to a level that was truly vile. I got a call from my son. The city's commercial vehicle enforcement division had paid a visit to my towing company's main yard. They were conducting a surprise, full inspection, citing an anonymous tip that we were running unsafe trucks and violating half a dozen regulations. It was a massive headache, designed to disrupt my business and cost me money. My son handled it. Our record was spotless, but the intent was clear. She was trying to hit my livelihood. The real gut punch, however, came a few days later. It was a knock on my door. 2 social workers from Child Protective Services stood on my porch. They had received an anonymous report. The report claimed that I had unsupervised young children living with me in an unsafe environment, and that there were signs of neglect and possible abuse. I don't have any young children. My only grandchild was a newborn who lived 3 hours away and had never even been to my house. The report was a complete, malicious fabrication. It was the lowest kind of attack, using a vital social service as a weapon of personal vengeance. I explained the situation to the social workers. They were professional, but they had to do their due diligence. They had to inspect my home. Having strangers walk through my house, looking in closets and asking probing questions based on a disgusting lie, was profoundly violating. It was an attempt to paint me as a monster. After they left, satisfied that the report was baseless, I sat in my quiet house and felt a kind of rage that was different from before. It was colder. Slower. This wasn't about a car or a parking spot anymore. This was about my name. My family. My integrity. She had declared total war. She was going to get it. The final piece of the puzzle, the key that would unlock her entire crooked enterprise, came from the most unexpected source imaginable. A few nights after the CPS visit, there was a tentative knock on my door. It was late, almost 10 o'clock. I opened it to find a young man standing there, probably in his late teens. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I recognized him immediately. It was Brenda's son, Kyle. "Mr. Frank," he mumbled, his voice quiet. Can I talk to you for a second?" I was wary, but I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't malice. It was shame. I stepped aside and let him in. He stood awkwardly in my living room, looking at the floor. "I know what my mom did," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The call to CPS. I heard her on the phone. She was bragging about it to my aunt." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a misery that was painful to see. "I'm so sorry. It's not right. None of what she does is right." He told me he was tired of it. Tired of her bullying, her lies, her constant need for control. He said the CPS call was the last straw for him. She keeps records, he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength. She's paranoid about getting audited, but she's too arrogant to stop what she's doing. She has a ledger. A little black book. She keeps it in her desk. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was it. The whistleblower. The inside source. What's in the ledger? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Everything, he said. The cash she collects for the parking spots. The kickbacks from my Uncle Mark's towing company. Even the money she schemes from the landscaping fund. She overreports the cost of the mowers and the fertilizer and pockets the difference. It's all in there. Dates, names, amounts. She's meticulous. It was the smoking gun. A handwritten confession of years of fraud and embezzlement. I can't live in that house anymore, Kyle said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm 18. I'm leaving. But before I go, I think you should have this. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, black, spiral-bound notebook. He placed it on my coffee table as if it were a bomb. I made a copy of the important pages on my phone, just in case, he said. But this is the original. Do what you have to do with it. He turned and left before I could even say thank you. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the black book on my table. It was so small, so innocuous. But inside, it held the complete and total destruction of Brenda's little kingdom. The next morning, I didn't call the local police. Dave's advice had been to go bigger. Local cops might get tangled in local politics. This was a financial crime. It needed specialists. Dave made a call to a friend of his, a detective in the state police's economic crimes unit. I met with Detective Miller that afternoon in a sterile office downtown. I laid it all out for him. I didn't editorialize. I didn't talk about my feelings or the harassment. I just presented the facts. I started with the property deed for my parking spot. I showed him the fraudulent fines. I presented the certified letter I sent and the board's official, signed denial. I showed him the invoice from his brother-in-law's corrupt towing company and the photos of the damage to my car. Then, I played him the video of the cash transaction. His eyebrows went up. Finally, I pushed the little black book across the desk. And this, I said, is her own record of the crimes. Detective Miller spent the next hour poring over the ledger. He was silent, his face a mask of professional concentration. Every now and then, he would let out a soft, low whistle. When he was done, he closed the book and looked at me. Mr. Frank, he said, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. You've done our job for us. This is one of the most well-documented, slam-dunk cases of fraud and embezzlement I've ever seen. He explained the next steps. They would get a warrant. They would corroborate the ledger with the HOA's bank records and the brother-in-law's business accounts. It would take a little time. Just sit tight, he told me. And let her keep thinking she's winning. The bigger the pedestal, the harder the fall. Sitting tight was the hardest part. Brenda, emboldened by my silence after her CPS attack, thought she had me on the ropes. She had convinced her cronies on the board that I was a menace to the community. Her final, glorious act of self-destruction came in the form of an official notice, posted on every door in the neighborhood. It was a notice for a special community meeting. The sole purpose of the meeting: to hold a vote on the expulsion of member Frank from the Serenity Gardens community for conduct detrimental to the neighborhood. She was trying to have me evicted from the home I owned. It was legally impossible, of course. An HOA can't just kick out a homeowner. But she was counting on the fact that most people didn't know that. She was using public shaming and the illusion of power as her final weapon. The meeting was her idea. Her stage. Her grand finale. It was perfect. I couldn't have planned it better myself. The night of the special meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. It seemed every resident of Serenity Gardens was there. The air was thick with tension and gossip. I saw people pointing at me, whispering behind their hands. Brenda had done her work well. To many of them, I was the villain. I took a seat in the back row with Dave beside me. I was carrying a simple briefcase. Inside was my entire file, copies of the deed, the letters, the photos, and printouts of key pages from Brenda's ledger. Brenda stood at the podium, basking in the attention. She looked regal, a queen addressing her court. She had dressed for the occasion in a severe-looking pantsuit. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice ringing with false solemnity. "We are here tonight to address a grave issue. The presence of a disruptive and hostile individual in our peaceful community." She then launched into a 15-minute tirade against me. It was a work of fiction so elaborate it could have won a literary award. She painted me as an aggressive bully who had been harassing her from the day I moved in. She claimed I was trying to destroy the community because I didn't want to follow the rules. She mentioned the doctored video and the constant threats. She even alluded to her fears for her own personal safety. She was digging her own grave with a silver shovel, and the whole neighborhood was watching. When she was finally done, her chest heaving with self-righteous indignation, she said, "The board moves to vote on the immediate expulsion of Frank, owner of Unit 7A. Point of order," I said, my voice calm and clear from the back of the room. Every head swiveled towards me. Brenda glared. "You are not recognized." According to Robert's Rules of Order, which this HOA's charter officially adopts, I continued, standing up and walking towards the front, "A member who is the subject of a disciplinary hearing has the right to speak in their own defense before a vote." She was momentarily stunned. She knew I was right. A few people in the audience murmured their agreement. She had no choice but to let me speak. "You have 5 minutes," she spat. "Thank you," I said, placing my briefcase on the table. "I won't need that long." I turned to face the residents, my neighbors. "My name is Frank," I began. "I moved here 10 months ago seeking peace and quiet after my wife passed away. I've tried my best to be a good neighbor. The picture that Brenda has just painted of me is inaccurate. And I have the documents to prove it." One by one, I calmly and methodically dismantled her entire narrative. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't resort to insults. I just presented the evidence. "Brenda claims this started because I refused to follow rules," I said. "It actually started when Brenda illegally commandeered my private, deeded parking spot, 7B. I held up a copy of my deed, the relevant section highlighted. She claims I harassed her. Here is a copy of the polite note I left on her car, and the registered letter I sent to the board, which she ignored. I held them up. She claims I created a doctored video. The video in question showed her accepting cash to rent out my private property. I won't show it again, but the state police's forensic lab has verified its authenticity." A gasp went through the room at the mention of the state police. Brenda's face went white as a sheet. "This isn't about my welcome mat or my garden hose," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "This is about an abuse of power. It's about fraud. For instance, the HOA's exclusive contract with Reliable Towing." I paused, letting the name sink in. Reliable Towing is owned by Brenda's brother-in-law. The company that illegally towed my late wife's car from my private driveway and damaged it. A company that has been systematically overcharging this community for years, with the full approval of your president. The murmurs in the room grew louder. People were looking at Brenda now, their expressions changing from support to suspicion. "And where does that money go?" I asked. "Where does the cash from the illegal parking rentals go? Where does the money skimmed from the landscaping budget go?" I opened my briefcase and took out the copies of the ledger pages. According to Brenda's own handwritten records, it goes right into her pocket. I began to read from the pages. June 3rd, cash parking, plumber, $20. June 5th, kickback, Reliable Towing, $200. June 10th, landscaping overage, $75. I read a dozen more entries. With each one, Brenda seemed to shrink. The color had drained from her face, replaced by a sweaty, desperate pallor. These are lies. Forgeries, she stammered, but her voice had no conviction. It was a hollow squeak. "This isn't just about me," I said, turning back to the residents. "She's been stealing from all of you. Every inflated invoice, every fake fine, every kickback, that's your money. Your HOA dues, which she has been using as her personal slush fund for years." The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions at Brenda, who stood frozen at the podium like a statue of disgraced royalty. And then, as if on cue, the main doors of the clubhouse swung open. Detective Miller from the state police walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. He had a warrant in his hand. "Brenda Peterson," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of felony fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Time seemed to slow down. The entire room went silent, watching the scene unfold. Brenda's composure finally, completely shattered. It wasn't a crack, it was an explosion. "No," she shrieked, her voice a raw, primal sound of disbelief. "You can't. This is my community. I run this place. It's him. He's the criminal. He faked everything." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "He's been stalking me. He's a monster." Detective Miller just sighed, "I'm tired of predictable theatrics. Ma'am, we have bank records. We have sworn testimony. We have your own ledger. It's over." The 2 officers moved in, gently but firmly taking her arms. The touch of the uniform on her skin seemed to send a jolt through her. The reality of the situation was finally crashing down. As they put the handcuffs on her, her eyes found mine across the room. They were filled with a venomous, impotent hatred. "You'll regret this," she screamed at me, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. "I'll own you. I'll sue you for everything you have. You'll wish you never met me." It was her last, hollow threat. A final, sputtering firework from a show that was definitively over. Everyone in that room knew it. She had nothing left. They led her out of the clubhouse, her shrieks and threats fading down the hallway. The Queen had been deposed, not in a quiet coup, but in a spectacular public implosion. The aftermath was swift and decisive. With Brenda gone, her house of cards collapsed. Her 2 cronies on the board resigned in disgrace the next day. An emergency election was held, and a new board was voted in, led by good, reasonable people, including my neighbor Dave. The first order of business for the new board was a full, independent audit. It revealed the true extent of Brenda's crimes. She had embezzled over $100,000 from the community over 5 years. Every illegal fine she had ever levied was identified and refunded with interest. The ridiculous rules about hose coils and welcome mats were struck from the books. The contract with Reliable Towing was terminated, and after a proper bidding process, my company was awarded the new contract, which we perform at a fair and honest rate. As for Brenda, her downfall was total. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had compiled, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Her assets were seized to pay restitution to the HOA. She lost her home, her reputation, and her freedom. Her brother-in-law's towing company went bankrupt under the weight of its own fraud investigation. The community began to heal. The atmosphere of fear and suspicion was replaced by one of genuine neighborliness. People started talking to each other again. The neighborhood Facebook group, once Brenda's weapon, became a place for organizing potlucks and sharing pictures of pets. Serenity Gardens finally started to live up to its name. Sometimes, I think back to the beginning of it all. I was just a man looking for a quiet life, a place to grieve and heal. I never wanted a fight. But I learned a valuable lesson. Some people see kindness as weakness, and a desire for peace as an invitation to be walked all over. They mistake a sleeping dog for one that has no teeth. Standing up to a bully isn't just about fighting back. It's about refusing to let them turn their world of misery and control into yours. It's about drawing a line in the sand, or in my case, the asphalt of a parking spot, and saying, no further. My life is quiet now. Truly quiet. My deeded spots, 7A and 7B, are always there for me. My truck sits in one. And in the other, on sunny days, sits a gleaming, cherry-red 1968 Mustang. I finished the restoration. It was the first thing I did after everything settled down. Working on that car, bringing it back to its former glory, felt like the final act of closing the chapter of my life. It was a tribute to Martha, and a symbol of my own resilience. Sometimes, on a warm evening, I take it for a drive. With the top down and the engine rumbling, I drive through the peaceful streets of my neighborhood. And I have to admit, there's a certain poetic justice, a deep and satisfying calm, in knowing that the Queen is in her cell, and I am free, driving my wife's car through the quiet kingdom I helped reclaim. Peace, I've learned, isn't something you're given. Sometimes, it's something you have to fight for. And once you have it, you never let it go.